I will sometimes just dot all over the image, doing bits here and there just for my own amusement really. There's no set order of doing anything. Some people like to work from lightest to darkest tones. Other people like to start in a corner and just work from there. There's, it doesn't fantastically matter. It sometimes can, especially if you're going for really dark stuff, it can sometimes help maybe to do those last, because as you get towards carbonising the wood, if I'm running my fingers over here, for example, I can smudge it a little bit, but and if I want to keep something pristine wood, then if I can avoid doing anything around it at all, because you pick up dirt and stuff on your hands and it gets into the wood, but there's no particular reason to do any bit more than any other. I generally like to do the eyes first, because that, well, it just kind of makes the thing come alive before you start. It's surprising, Bubbles the Monkey. You just do. It's surprising how much patience you get when you're doing something like this. I tend to like techniques which give me an instant result, and what you kind of end up with is, I've got a result. Okay, the result isn't as dark as I want. This does want to go dark. It's looking quite light there, as you can probably see. Compare with the actual reference image, and so I will have to go over. So when I go over again, it goes a bit darker, so I get a result. So it's each time I'm doing it, I'm getting a result, and I'm getting towards the ultimate result, which is the colour that I'm after. I kind of would say as well that if with more experience you can work faster, and as you work faster you can turn the heat up, so you can get there. It's practice makes perfect type of thing. So you can get faster as you develop the techniques and you learn how the wood or the tool is reacting to what it is you're asking it to do. So it's not really a case of patience. In actual fact, it never really comes into it when you start doing something like this. It's my opinion, if you like, that patience comes into it when it's not going right. That's when you have to apply the patience. It's on the other piece, for example, I could not get the wood to go dark at one point. It just sort of capped out at a middle level, and that's when frustration builds, and that's when you need the patience. Something like this, it's as Freeze just said, you get lost in it, and I'm a little bit more aware of it when I'm streaming, because I'm talking and explaining and answering, and talking to you guys. But if I was doing this off the stream, I can easily spend 4 or 5 hours. I can start doing this and look up, and it'll be 4 hours later, and it just goes. Yeah, as Freeze just said, Freeze said as well, the same thing. It really, time just vanishes. It's don't know where it goes. It's very much like you just get into a time machine and come out, and you happen to have something in front of you that you've been working on for a few hours, and sometimes you kind of even don't realise that you get there. It's sort of I did that on that piece. It was kind of like, I was doing this, and then a bit later I looked at it, and I just finished a bit on the back of it, and thought, oh, I've done it. It's interesting you say that, though, Bubbles. I mean, the beat sprites, perler type stuff, which actually interests me, and I might later this year I might actually get around to trying some of that. And it's kind of like you're picking up a thing and putting it down, you're picking up a thing and putting it down, you're picking up a thing and putting it down, you're picking up a thing and putting it down. How on earth do you have the patience to do that? It's the same thing all the time. Gluten-free gamer, thank you very much for following, that's most kind of you. So it's I can ask you the same question, it's a different colour and you put it in a different place, but how on earth do you have the patience to keep doing that? Ah dear. You can, as daft as it sounds, you can do a form of pyrography on toast. If you take a piece of bread and you put it on something flat and you actually squeeze it in a pattern or a shape and then toast it, the shape will come out of the toast, if you see what I mean. It'll be a different colour. So you can put an image onto a piece of toast. It's one of those things. I did at one point see some. You could get like sort of like cookie or press things. So it was kind of like I'd say relief carving, but like a cookie cutter type of thing, but with blunt blades, so it didn't actually cut. So you'd have a pattern of something, a coffee cup or something like that, which you could actually press into the bread, so that when you toasted it, you got this. I can't remember which way whether it got lighter or darker, but the image that you'd pressed into it stood out. And that's another way, actually. Take your toast, toast it until it's really brown. Better if it's not burnt, because it smells like terrible. But then when you got your toast, take a knife, a fairly sharp knife, and as you scrape the surface away, the more you scrape, the lighter it gets. You can actually create an image on toast by scraping, which is not. I can do the same thing with pyrography, and I will to put the whiskers on here, for example. I'll do the whole of the cat, and then I'll take a really sharp knife and I'll actually scrape the whiskers on, which is precisely what I did there. So you could do it on toast. So you could do this sort of thing on toast. I mean, I could actually do a similar thing on wood. I can make the whole thing dark brown and then scrape the wood off to get lighter. It's just easier to do it the other way around. But on something like toast, you could actually create artwork out of toast. You really must have toasted it badly if you managed to hit it with a hammer and it shatter. I love waffles, or I like waffles, sorry. Yeah, bread scraping. A slightly more organic version of the scraper board that I was doing earlier on in the stream last week. See, it's amazing what you can turn into an art form. But the Perla stuff, my personal interest is not so much in things like the bead sprites, the sprites. It's more in taking, doing something like, it wouldn't be this small, I guess, but a picture like of the pussycat, and making something that was recognisably this cat when it was complete. But it's a it's what I call a pixel-based art, and I have got a sort of a real interest in pixel-based arts, which I've had for a number of years. It started because I am a licensed radio amateur, so as part of that I got interested in weather satellites a long time ago, and weather satellites send their image down in a technique, it's either called slow scan or it's actually like a fax machine. It comes down essentially a pixel at a time, and I could receive that, and the image builds up really slowly, it's several seconds per line, so I could actually see the individual pixels coming in one at a time of different shades of grey, and they're quite large, pixels to fill the screen I was using, and I got really fascinated because of that. And of course, as it builds, you get a picture of the cloud or whatever the satellite was transmitting. And ever since then, I've been really fascinated in it, and I do a lot of other art which is pixel-based rug making. You can do things like cross stitch, which is pixel-based art, perler, and stuff like that. I was busy. Busy talking and not reading chat. Good evening. No. This one doesn't have that sort of attitude. He's more of a loner. Comes to you when he wants something, but not otherwise. Why can't you wait for college, Waffles? I don't think any of your followers like painting of carvings, Lost. None of them are elected to follow to come back. They might drop in occasionally, I guess, but there isn't that many greys available, is there, Bubbles Debunky, or do they actually make a special kit of them for grayscale? I think when you take sort of the hammer beads and the perler, and there's another one, there only seems to be about 5 or 6. Mind you, 5 or 6 is enough to create a grayscale. Yeah, I've looked. Well, I've sort of had a look around to see if there is any software to make it easier, but there seem to be quite a few bits of software which really just digitize the image. They just posterize the image. They just make the pixels bigger and give you dithering and stuff like that. But for other reasons, dithering never really looks good unless you're really a long way away. And I think it takes there's a level of skill which you have to employ to say, actually, you know what, they're the wrong colours. Okay, I'll take a look at that one. Thank you for the link, Bubbles. I would prefer if anybody feels like posting links, they ask first, so that you don't accidentally get timed out. But that's okay. Okay, I'll take a look at that. I don't specifically mean just real pictures, if that makes sense, rather than the sort of 8-bit images and things like that. Waffle hype. And I don't know what Noodle Nation. Either that's a takeaway type or a similar place, or it's a streamer. I'm never sure which. Do you stream then, Bubbles? No, it's okay. It's just a general. I mean, the link was appropriate, shall we say? So that's okay. And we were talking. Obviously, the people that just drop in stream and drop links is not necessarily polite, but that was fine. Don't worry about it. So do you stream, Bubbles, or are you just interested in watching other people? Because if you do stream and you stream at a time when I can take a look and you're doing that particular kit, I'd be interested to take a look. Just around here. The other thing that helps when doing things like cat fur is remembering that which fur is on top of which fur. So whilst I've kind of done this, what I really should do is start at the back and work forward, because if you recall on cats, if you stroke a cat, you're stroking it in the direction of the fur, and you're not ruffling up his fur, and that's because the fur nearest his head lays on top of the fur further back, and so on as you go backwards. So if you do it, if you create the textures from the back coming forward, then you're laying the front textures over the back textures, and it looks natural, and it doesn't look so much as though you've rubbed the cap the wrong way. Which, daft as it sounds, some cats absolutely adore, and others don't. So I've kind of done this one backwards, but the white overlays this, and some of the nose overlays it as well. So I'm kind of, it's not so bad, because the other thing about using this particular tool, shall we say, is that if I now start at the back and work forward, because this needs to be gone over again, I'll reimpose these textures over the top of the fur as I bring it forward. So it's not an irrecoverable thing. It's just a nice thing to do in that way. It helps keep the realism that you're after. Oh, it is a Chinese restaurant, is it? Okay. Noodle Nation is just the sort of thing that could be a great streaming name for somebody. Well, that's so. What time zone are you in, Bubbles? I mean, I'm in British summertime here, which is GMT +1, so it's coming out for 9:30 local time here. So when would that correspond for yourself? Because I'd like to see that. It's as I say, it's intrigued me enough to to have a look at what it was. Look at the bees, look at the I would say, I don't know if there's hundreds of colours, but there's a heck of a lot of colours available and things like that. Oh, so you'll be fairly that'll be about an hour ahead of us now, so it must be about 10:30 for you. What let you capitalise your name? I like waffles. I'm surprised. Saturday, Monday and Tuesday. Okay. I tell you what I'm going to do. I will, because I do want to see that, I'm going to follow you. So that hopefully I generally stop streaming about 10 PM my time, so I should get notified then when you go live, which will remind me, and I'll try and drop in and have a look. Thank you for sharing that. Okay. Tiny dagger strokes, 3D here. That's sort of an in reference to do with airbrushing, if anybody wonders. One of the techniques which is really good to learn, well, there's kind of 3 techniques for airbrushing that are really good to learn. There's dots, so being able to spray a dot just where you want it, draw lines from one place to another place without creating a dot on each end, which is a skill in itself. And dagger strokes, and a dagger stroke is where you effectively start with something that's it's conical or it's a triangular shape, but it starts as a fairly wide dot, and then it tails away to a very fine taper, a bit like you imagine a hair would do, if you like. It starts thick at the root and comes out to thin, and that's where you use dagger strokes a lot, is for hair, because hair, you get that sort of texture with it. And that's kind of what's happening here, because as I put the pen down, I'm creating that dark spot, and as I move it away fairly quickly, I'm getting a light thin hair, so I'm kind of getting dagger strokes quite easily, as opposed to on airbrushing, which took several weeks of trying for me to be able to at least get some of them. So Free, do you actually have sheets and sheets of papers of squares and dots? I know, I got a load of wallpaper lining paper, and one of the techniques for learning is you draw squares, just ruled lines, so they come out as squares, and then you take your airbrush and shoot a dot at each cross point, and basically do it fairly rapidly. So, and the idea is to hit dead center and to get an even spread of paint. So it teaches you not to tilt the airbrush, but to actually be spraying straight at it. And then the lines exercise is to draw from one intersection to the next intersection and stop. So you create like a dashed line as you go across, and then you come back the other way. It's important to do it both ways, and then go up and go down, or down and up, whichever way you wish, and you can actually end up drawing squares, and that teaches you control of when and to start the paint flowing and when to stop it flowing, so it stops exactly where you want and starts, and to keep the airbrush moving. And then the dagger strokes, which is a different thing. So yeah, kitchen roll's hard though, because it just absorbs the paint and it looks fuzzy. I mean, I got a roll of as I say, lining paper, about 50p, and it's something like about 60 yards long. Now let me catch up a bit on. You don't need to hide bubbles, confidence, go in there. Yeah, check the breather hole in the cap. I have had that happen, and yes, it does really, yeah. For people that may not have realised, that was a problem that Free had with an airbrush, and I have to have one here. What happens is air is blown, if you like, past. I'll simplify this for you. Air is kind of blown past a thin hole in the bottom of this cup here, which is what sprays the paint out. I'm oversimplifying that a lot, but it's the actual act of the air blowing past the nozzle which sucks the paint out. If you put something solid over the top of there, like cover it up completely, then what happens is as the air does this, it creates a vacuum in there, and at some point the vacuum equals the pressure that's the air is trying to exert to blow the paint out, and it stops. And the caps that you get fit on these here have a little tiny air hole in the middle, so that you don't get that. But especially if you shake paint, you mix your paint by shaking it in the airbrush, the paint can go into that little tiny hole and block it. And unless you realise what's happening, it's very similar to having a blockage in the airbrush itself. So you end up taking it apart, looking at where the problem is. You take the cap off, and you can mix your paint, or you wash the airbrush out, you put the cap back on, and the problem keeps coming back. And then when it hits and it's just a little tiny pinprick, you put a pin in that hole, or rub it with your finger, whatever, and then it works perfectly. And I tell you what, and Free's probably thinking the same thing, is you don't half feel an idiot when you realise what it is. Yeah, but I was going to say, once you're up at £35, Free, it's a lot easier to blast that cap into your face, because it don't come out of that hole that quick. It doesn't once it starts bubbling. But yeah, I've never done that. I must admit, I've never blasted a cap. But there again, I don't tend to mix in the airbrush, so that's. I guess I've got away with that one so far. One thing about using this technique is what this is creating is kind of a V shape in the wood, but I'm only really cooking the sap on one side of it. which in itself is an interesting technique, because from the angle I'm looking at it here, it's darker than if I turn it round and look at it from this angle here, because I'm seeing the other side of the V shape. And it's a bit like these 3D pictures that you get sometimes. It's like a Fresnel effect, but it does mean that what I'm going to have to do is come round and go through this piece this way round, and to catch the other side of that angle. Sorry, I'm spinning this round a lot, so hopefully I'm not making you dizzy. So that's, yeah. So I have a tendency to sort of do things like so that's and yeah, and as I'm talking to myself, as I'm comparing what I'm doing against the reference image that I've got. Well, you can see it in the bottom left, but I've got a bigger version on the screen in front of me. As I go, yeah, I need to, and I'm missing out the words that say yes, I need to come down here, but I don't want to get too close because I want to leave at least a little bit of white showing through. So I'm going to do it by, and I've missed out all those words by just going yeah, and I shall try and remember. Yeah. Yes, 3. Yeah. It's one of the reasons I tend to run without the cap off, but I never tend to fill the paint cup. I have a couple of times done the old joke that nobody ever does, which is give somebody a cup and say what time is it in the pot. Nobody ever really does that, but I have done it with the airbrush. I've been holding the airbrush and gone, and I've had paint down my front. Or you're just trying to get in at an angle, and your natural thing is to turn over to, and paint's dribbling out the side of the cup. It's kind of worse on the Infinity as well because the cup's smaller, but sorry to everybody. We've kind of as you might gather, Free is an airbrush artist. He streams regularly on Twitch, generally from about 10 o'clock on a night in UK for a couple of hours, and I think you're having a few nights off, aren't you? I think you said Free, but catch Free when he's streaming, because he's a very good airbrush artist. He's done, or has been doing, some really good monochrome work, so things like a Darth Vader helmet in white on black canvas, a xenomorph, for example, and quite a few other things, as well as working with brushes as well for some of his commissioned work. The Rat Pack, I think, is one, isn't it, Free, that you've worked on? But he also does colour stuff like anime characters. He was doing a nice triptych last night. I had to leave. Well, actually, no, I caught the end because you stopped on time, didn't you, Free? I don't quite know how you describe that. It's sort of a tribal stroke, fantasy stroke, something. I know it wasn't intended to be a face, but it looked like a face with two eyes, two sort of really elongated wide eyes. Not quite sure how you describe it, but it was an interesting thing to see, and so I encourage everybody to take a look next time Free streaming. But as you might gather with any sort of craft or job or whatever, the people who partake of that craft or whatever, you start to learn a sort of a shorthand. So I talk about things like an infinity, for example, and Free knows what I'm talking about, but you guys have got absolutely no idea. So just to sort of explain it, it's actually a model of airbrush, and that actually is an infinity. It's a model of airbrush made by